Yeah. I mean, do I go first or do you go first?
Am I supposed to go?
I don't know. I actually have no idea what to do.
But Rob always goes first.
He didn't leave us with instructions. He's left me with its place to take care of, but he didn't leave me with instructions on how we get this podcast started.
do we call him? Is there a number?
I think he's off the grid. I think he's well deserved, but he's off the grid. So I think we're on our own, my friend.
We're on our own this week. It's a Kelly and Brad talking pop, two figureheads. We're doing it. We're talking.
And we're talking Ghostbusters Afterlife this week.
Boom.
So
Boom.
Yeah, we'll get into what we thought about that. But Brad, you and I were texting
yes.
just a little bit before this episode, and we kind of unbeknownst to each other, but we sort of found out that we both rewatched the originals in anticipation for this episode.
Well, I even jumped the gun. I jumped the gun this year too, because I was like, to me, Ghostbusters is also like a Halloween staple.
Yes.
So I always have to watch them. So I was like very prepared this year going into the sequel.
And of course, the theme songs on everyone's Halloween playlist.
Has to be.
Yes. So it is something I tend to revisit annually as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it got me thinking, like, you know, we've got Ghostbusters Afterlife, which we're going to review in a few moments. Mm-hmm. We had the movie from 2016 a few years ago, which, you know, we can share. Yeah, we can share our thoughts on that, but I think I speak for both of us when we say that's not our favorite movie.
No, and you know what's still strange to me to this day is the fact that cast seemed like it would have worked. It actually kind of does. Like I love Kate McKinnon, I love Melissa McCarthy, like that. It seemed like in its own way they kind of filled those gaps of like that style of comedy. But it was a soft reboot is what they were trying to do in reality. It
sure was. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a good, like, because when I think of those original movies, there's great moments. You know, we've got the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, we've got Zool, we've got all of the mythology in those movies. But what makes those movies work is that cast. I think you've got lightning in a bottle. That is
exactly what I was going to say. So you took the words out of my mouth. It's true. It's true though. Like like there's just something to be said for all these remakes that we keep doing, or all these like soft reboots or these sequels and things. It's like, you're up against it. Even some of these, like, you know, this is maybe a bit of a reach here, but even some of these Disney movies that they've done, like the live action version, it's like, they weren't bad maybe per se, but it's like you're trying to recapture this like legitimate lightning in a bottle magical moment in film history, and you're trying to redo it, and it's like, why? Like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like you said, we're gonna get into it, we're gonna talk about it, but I think it would be unfair to not talk about the OGs first.
Yeah, I mean, so in a rewatch of those movies, I mean, the first one for me is like, goes without saying, is the one.
Mm-hmm.
But I gotta say, like, even the second one, while totally a offender of, like, you know, the sequel trope where you pretty much just like copy and paste the movie and kind of do it again exactly the same way.
Sure.
I still love it.
Who doesn't?
I love Vigo. I love the pink slime.
How can you not? Like, that's we grew up with those movies, and it's like it's like the dynamic of, you know, Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd, and I mean the whole cast and everybody that's been involved, whether it was, you know, oh my God, his name is slipping my mind now, Canadian icon. Rick Moranis just got decked in New York a couple of weeks back too, or a couple of months ago or something, and it was like, don't you dare touch Rick Moranis. It's just there's something about those movies, and they are so built on the fact that it was like the writing is brilliant, the cast was brilliant, that I feel like anything they've tried to do since those original two has been, while I'm sure a labor of love, has been at times like a very, like, you're trying to recapture that special quality that it had. Because I mean, like, the firehouse is maybe like a 10-minute subway ride away from me. And one day, legitimately, when I first moved here, I found it by accident, just wandering around, and I audibly gasped. And I went, "Is that?"
You wanted to go in and shut off the power grid and slide down the pole.
Slide down the pole. Like, that's what I wanted. I wanted to go in. It's actually like an active firehouse. So I was like, well, that's not going to happen. No. But this is the kind of lingering quality that these original movies left on people. It was like, that's why I feel like there was never a third. Like, we also always heard these stories of, them sending Bill Murray scripts in the mail and him throwing them through the shredder and sending them back and being like, this isn't good, this isn't right. So when the Melissa McCarthy and that group gave it, I'm sure they're all, it didn't land for many reasons, whether it be pacing or the comedy or what have you. My hopes were, I mean, you can listen to previous podcasts, everyone, go into the history. But I've been very excited for this. I've been very excited for this.
Yeah. So I think when I think about those original ones, the things that stand out for me, that will be kind of a good way to start talking about this new movie is one, and you spoke to it just now, it's set in New York and it feels like New York. Yes. And New York is almost a character in a sense, and that's a big part of it in those original movies. The other thing is that you've got Harold Ramis and you've got Dan Aykroyd, who wrote the scripts of the original ones, and they actually, particularly Dan Aykroyd, like had an interest in the supernatural. So it wasn't just a story about like a haunted house. Like, it was like this weird mythology about, this crazy architect who built this building that's basically like a beacon system for supernatural energy. So it was like, it had that like actual real element to it, but then you mix in Bill Murray's, I don't know anybody with you can't do it. Like, you can't, the way
can't duplicate that man.
Yeah, the way that he delivers lines, the way that he delivers just like even lines that aren't funny, the way that he says them is so funny. Like in the second movie, you open up and they've gone their separate ways, and he's hosting that talk show.
Yes.
And he's talking to the guy, and the person says, he goes, I have a psychic belief that like things are gonna the world is gonna end on February 14th 2000 and something, and he just turns and goes, Valentine's Day. And just the way he says it, it's
yeah, I know.
The way that he delivers,
you can't duplicate it.
You can't duplicate it. You can't duplicate it.
And you know what? I feel like that is such a byproduct of the fact that you had Harold Ramis and Dan Aykroyd writing the originals. These are two comedy writers and legends in their own right now, of course, but that was something that it was interesting hearing. Like, there's been previous documentaries. There's one on Netflix about the making of, I think it was The Movies That Made Us. They did a short documentary on Ghostbusters. Phenomenal. But they do like a full breakdown of like how there was different actors supposed to be in it. Like Jim Belushi was originally supposed to be in it, and so was Eddie Murphy. But you get these little side notes of little things like, scenes that make the final cut of like the original. Remember when he walks into Dana's apartment and he starts playing the keys and he goes, they hate this. They hate this. That was a total improv. And if you watch, they talk about it in the documentary, that it's like, you see the camera do this a little bit. It's the cameraman laughing. And he can't keep the camera still. So it's like, it's these little things that you hold so like dear to your heart when you think about these movies. I feel like that's the perfect segue into this, because I truly feel like this movie was, meaning this most recent incarnation, Afterlife was a love letter to those movies, whether it be a full cup of tea that we enjoyed or not. It was very clearly a love letter.
Oh yeah, like removed from having watched those movies somewhat recently and refreshing myself ahead of going and seeing this one, those movies I know, like I've seen, particularly the first one, 100 times.
Oh, easily.
I know those movies off the back of my hand. So, as I was watching this movie, like everything meant something to me. Even, you go into Egon's house barn and you notice in the back corner, there's like the stack of books all the way up to the ceiling. And it's, no human being would ever stack books like this. Like it, like every little bit meant something to someone like me. Whereas, going with my partner to the movie, he's seen the movie, certainly.
Sure.
Is he diehard like I am? No. And so you could tell there was a difference in the enjoyment of the film, of the sort of buy-in of the film, and the kind of knowing where, why this mattered. So, when I look at and I'm not too big on basing any sort of opinion off the Rotten Tomatoes score, but it's sitting at a 63 right now. It's sitting at a 63 right now. And that feels right to me, I think, given that there's a pretty big dependency here on seeing those first movies. And, I'm not sure if you removed the elements of those first movies, how much we'd have left for this movie to stand on its own.
Yes, that's my general takeaway from this as well. Is that it's, while very enjoyable at times, and listen, it felt like a bit of a roller coaster ride for me at times, where it was like, I'm really enjoying this. And then it kind of like second act, I kind of, dipped a little bit, and I was kind of like, this is maybe not long-winded, but it was like, it was losing its levity and was becoming like a little, maybe heavy-handed at times. Yeah. And then the comedy seemed a little forced at times. While I so appreciated the fact that it was like a real set, and there was real care taken with the fact that it was like, we are going to make this look and feel as much as an original Ghostbusters movie as possible, whether it even come down to things like the Keymaster and the Gatekeeper. It's like it was like they had gone back and done like the animatronic or puppet work, but like accentuated it.
It looked very practical. A lot of this movie looked very practical. I'm not,
very practical.
There's pieces of it that were for sure CGI, but like I would say overall, like this movie, it was such an interesting experience for me because like I said, you could tell there was so much like it's a father-son like handing of the torch, literally, the way that this was done. Yes. But yeah, I was with you. I think the first act, the first part of the movie was a lot stronger than the latter parts of the movie. I think you had some interesting things happening with, I liked that we were centered on Egon's granddaughter, which, you didn't need to wait for that reveal. You just looked at her and you were like, oh yes.
Incredible casting. Incredible.
She did such a fabulous job. Like, we're lucky that Rob's not here this week because we know how much he doesn't like children in movies.
I bet he would be sold by her. McKenna Grace is her name.
I actually think he would too. She did a really fabulous job. And then, I loved Paul Rudd. I thought the scene where he puts on Cujo for the class was the funniest moment in that. Like that was the one moment that actually had me like LOL.
I burst out laughing. And then even when they cut back later and he's got Child's Play on.
Then he's got Child's Play on. Yeah. But like I wanted more Paul Rudd. I actually was kind of like, and you know what? I bet you there was something like very odd, like he was very honored that he's like, I'm basically Rick Moranis in this movie. I get to be the Keymaster. Yes. But yeah, like I thought he got a little shortchanged by the second half.
Me as well.
And then to be honest, like none of the other characters, fine performances for sure with what they were given. Yeah. None of the I didn't feel, I didn't feel connected to podcast.
I know. You know what? He was very like,
and he's a very kid.
Oh, of course. And listen, he hit the lines the way he was supposed to, and he did all the things that he was supposed to. He did his job fine. But just as far as like the character development, even down to buddy from Stranger Things, Wolfhard.
Finn Wolfhard.
As Finn Wolfhard as the brother. Like it just
he wasn't given much to do either. Like I was
like
kind of thinking, like, why didn't he take some of Podcast's? Like, why couldn't the two of them, the two grandchildren of Egon, go off together to solve this with the help of Paul Rudd, the seismologist? Like, I felt it could have ended there, but then we had to get the girlfriend from the cafe. And honestly, to me, that just read, we want 4 kids in the suits at the end.
Correct.
And like,
the thing that I kept thinking at the end of the day was I was kind of like, I would have been so much more behind the fact that it was like, clearly we were going to have 4 new, people fill the suits and go ghost busting. And to me, in my mind, I was like, oh, Paul Rudd is going to be the Bill Murray. Yeah, he's going to be a Bill Murray, because he has a very dry sense of humor and delivery in his joke telling and line delivery in every movie. I'm like, that is literally one of the most perfect, other than just slotting Bill Murray right back in. That is somebody that I felt like could like carry the weight of that.
Like, he's no Bill Murray, but he's got the right sensibilities to handle that.
Agreed.
That portion of the dynamic, right? Because you got, like from the originals, you've got Ernie Hudson, who's like our everyman. And to me, that was like Finn Wolfhard, right? Like he's like, I don't really understand any of this, but I'm here and I'm in it and I'm going to do it. And then you've got, like, to me, McKenna Grace's character was kind of both Egon and Ray and like her, whatever. And then I'm like, okay. And then you got Paul Rudd, who's the comedic, but then you got all these other characters thrown in. They were trying to make Podcast Ray, because you saw at the end, they had like the cute little exchange where he, in fact,
and he kept wearing
to his podcast,
the goggles and everything. And that kind of like general like whimsy of like being like the kind of more techie guy, like with the gadgets in the car and the this, that, and the next thing. Yeah, there was also just like a general sense, like I actually laughed out loud, not to the movie at one point, but I saw it in IMAX, by the way. I don't know how you saw it.
Not in IMAX.
Not in IMAX. I saw it in IMAX, and it genuinely did add a level of like gravitas to it because the sound and obviously the gigantic screen. But there was somebody like, I guess, like behind me and to the right. And they genuinely at one point, it was where they were like really driving through the town and they're like blasting everything. And they find the little RC car version of, the ghost trap and like everything else.
Which is like based on a toy from like the 80s.
Yes. But it was like this person said, I think what everybody in the theater was thinking, which was, how do they know how to do these things right now? Yeah. Like, how do they know? Like, how did he know to just pull it out and like start using it? Like, there was no real, because with the original movies, it was like, well, they built that stuff. They knew how to, like, so you just kind of accepted it, that it was like, they're smart. They know what they're doing. They knew how to do it.
But even then, right? Like in the original movie, it's like, yes, you've got Egon and Ray who are like geniuses and whatever. And then you've got like Bill, and then you've got Venkman, who's, got a certain level of knowledge, but he's certainly a little more on the outskirts of like, explain this to me in English, please. Right. Mm-hmm. But there's an element of that, they go into that. First of all, I'll just say the other thing that's impossible to compare is that the first movie is epically paced. Right. Because you go into that first ghost busting thing, which happens within the, when they're in the fancy hotel before, there's the library scene, but they're not busting at that point.
Right.
So you go to the hotel, right? Mm-hmm. Which is in the first like 30 minutes of the movie.
Yes.
And then, but what I love about it is like, while the 3 of these guys know what they're trying to do, they've actually never used this equipment before. And they're damaging the walls and they're
good shooting, right?
And they almost say to the woman, "What the hell are you doing?" And she like comes around the cart and stuff. Like that's part of like the magic of the whole thing is it's these 4 like ultra ordinary men. and even
real
at the
blue
end,
collar,
it's like,
yes.
and even at the end, it's like, I guess we'll try crossing the streams. We have no idea if this is going to work, but we're just a bunch of dudes. And so like, yeah, I hear you when you like think about this movie, and like, I know they were trying to kind of really, draw the connection that, of course, Egon's granddaughter is an absolute genius, but yeah, it kind of took that, like, that silliness out of like the Ghostbusters to me is a comedy. Like, it's a comedy. And so this movie to me felt it was really leaning in on like the supernatural sciencey elements of Ghostbusters,
right,
with a peppering in of comedy. And I think that's why the tones felt so different. Now that being said, that's because they're two different directors.
Well, and listen, that's kind of what and I'm never going to fault a director or a writer for, if they're tasked with, continuing a story in a franchise that's beloved or whatever, of trying to take something in a new direction or what have you. But it almost just felt like I almost would have preferred he just go fully his way instead of
yes, I agree with you,
being plagued by the fact that it was like he wanted it to still have so much element of his father Ivan Reitman's telling of the story, but also like there did seem to be like a lot of like Spielbergian elements, like whether it be
for
podcast
sure,
where it was like very Goonies, even just again the fact that they brought in Finn Wolfhard again, and it was just kind of like he seems to be a staple in like all these like 80s remakes and or just like again Stranger Things, like little again love letter to 80s movies and things, and it just seemed like we were trying to do too many things at times, while not to the point that I like, again, like we said, not that we hated it at all, but just that it was kind of like confused, I think at times.
And I think like, things like, I mentioned the stacked books, Ray's goggles.
Yes.
Those little elements I think are enough to bring people like you and I back in. I was actually disappointed, as much as it's fun to see the old iconography of that original. I was kind of disappointed that we were back with Gozer and Zool, and like almost a shot for shot remake of when the Keymaster and the Gatekeeper put their hands up, the lightning comes down, they turn into the dogs. Are you a god? Like,
I was gonna say, it was
with Olivia Wilde. Was that Olivia Wilde?
Okay, thank you. I don't think it was, but that is hilarious that you think it was also Olivia Wilde. I'll check, but I don't think it was. I think it was somebody else. And
it looked just like her for sure.
Unless it was, and IMDb is just still, holding
holding it back. It sure as heck looked like her. It was for sure J.K. Simmons as Ivo Shandor, the guy, who's being preserved in the tomb there, and then he wakes up and immediately gets murdered by who we're assuming is Olivia Wilde. So cute little, like, those are cute, but I was kind of thinking, I'm like, oh man, like, and I guess I was expecting it. I saw the trailers. I knew we were getting the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, which was a cute scene, all the murder suicide of the mini Stay Puft.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it was like I think they're really banking on the fact that there's going to be little Stay Puft Marshmallow Men in people's stockings this year. That's what I kept taking.
Yeah. So I would have liked to have seen, like, I'm with you, where it's like, put in some of the things, like I liked that. Like, I liked that it was the family of Egon. That's a nice tribute to Harold Ramis. We'll get into that portion in a moment here. Then I liked, like, just the little nods here and there. I loved one thing I did really enjoy, compared to that 2016 was I liked that the score sounded like the original, and just those little things I think are enough to get the good feels in people's
I agree. I fully agree.
People's minds. And then then it went too far into, we've got to give them the exact same thing they got in that first movie, and that's where the movie got lost for me.
And listen, I understood the idea of it being, because in reality, when you do think about that original Ghostbusters movie, the way it ended, they didn't really capture her. They didn't like Zool, or like, you know what I mean? Like there was this whole, there was a connection there that actually did make sense on paper, as far as it being like, oh yeah, they if you think about it, they really didn't ghost bust her.
Yeah,
Like it was,
they didn't catch her in the trap or anything.
they didn't catch her in the trap. And quite honestly, that first scene of the whole movie, Ghostbusters Afterlife, where you see Harold Ramis racing in the car and running into the house, and like that whole scene, I was completely bought in. I was completely bought into that. Even the arms coming out of the chair and grabbing him, and like very much obviously like Dana in the first one, and what have you. Again, like it was like a darker tone, but yeah, like you said, it was just very like, well, we've seen this. We've seen this happen before. Obviously, the stakes were higher this time. It was kind of like, you find out that he's dedicated his life to trying to keep this from spreading and actually being the end of times, like he had been talking about in the first movie, and like really keeping them in place. While that was cool, it seemed very much like beat for beat, like how they got her the first time. Like it was,
they crossed the street. I did like the concept. The one thing that they changed about it that I liked was like, oh, and this was how they brought Paul Rudd's character in, was the earthquakes, and how we figured out later that's like them trying to emerge. Like that was a cool concept. But then like you say, it's like, then they just go, uh-oh, like fail safe, Paul Rudd comes in possessed as the keymaster, and now we're going to do the shot for shot ending. So that, there were good ideas in it, but it was too tied down by that original. The other thing I wanted to touch on, I kind of alluded to it earlier before we talk about the treatment of the original cast in this movie, was, for me, and I know it served a story purpose, I can totally see it, but I was really missing New York City in this movie.
Big time. Because and I think they knew. I think they knew that people might be missing it, because the post-credit scenes were very like, we're opening this back up to another sequel that might kind of stand on its own, and maybe it won't be quite as bogged down with feeling like it has to be this love letter and everything else, where, again, while I loved it at times, there were times where it felt plagued by it. And I felt like it going back to New York, potentially setting up a sequel, which I think it's making good money right now.
It is.
So the odds are they're going to do it, which I'm here for. Cause you know what? Like I missed the fact that it was New York. I feel like it missed that sort of grandiose quality.
Especially rewatching that second movie, right? Because that whole ending, they come walking through New York in the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah.
Then they get zapped by Vigo. They're on the ground. The roof of the Manhattan Museum is blown open, and everyone's outside singing. And it's like, and actually, and then there's even like the scene earlier, like the plot is actually even contingent on like, the bad reputation New Yorkers have for, and he goes,
gruff. Trust me, I'm here. It's real.
But he says, you know what he says? He goes, being miserable is every New Yorker's goddamn given right. Like the mayor says that. So it's like, it's so a part of the like identity. So it's so funny. It's so funny though, because I'm kind of contradicting myself here, because we're saying, oh, we would have loved this to be its own thing. But at the same time, I miss elements of it. So I think that's the takeaway of trying to like remake these movies is, are you ever going to fully win? Because
no,
you're never going to recapture it, and you're never probably going to do anything so wildly spectacularly different that we forget about what was.
Well, and you know what? I think that's the general consensus we have to walk away from this with, is the fact that it's like, first of all, the fourth act saved it for me. As far as what they brought to the table with the emotion, and yes, it was shot for shot at times, but it was like, it did seem like the stakes were really high. Also, let's talk about the CG a little bit. I was fully into it. I thought that there was also great elements of like genuine jump scares at time. No.
Yes. Yep.
Like
Actually,
I
it was funny.
actually
So
jumped a few times.
they got me twice. And then,
Yeah.
and then I had this lovely little girl a few rows back. And so there was one point where, you know, it's kind of a tension building scene. And one of the characters goes, "What's that?" And she goes, "A ghost?" And I'm like, I'm like, this girl's got it. And then
she's smart.
And then the jump scare came and she went, "I'm not scared." And I was like, oh.
Oh, well, it got me. Holy cow.
Wow.
Good for her. Good for her. But yeah,
So,
I think more than anything, it's you know, what they built to at the end with Harold Ramis very much like I did the again, I wish I had my Kelly furnished blanket.
Did you shed a tear?
Did I? I got like the full lump. I got the full lump in my throat and was like actually like choking it back because it was so tastefully done. And I also had known going into this that there had been an actually very strained relationship with Bill Murray and Harold Ramis. And for anybody that doesn't know, there was the story went that, you know, they hadn't spoken. I believe it was after doing the movie Stripes or something, but it was like, it was Groundhog Day. There was a lot of tension on set between the two of them. I think they each said things to each other that they didn't really mean, but you know, tensions were high, what have you. And they hadn't spoken for years and years and years. And Bill Murray, when he found out that Harold Ramis was on essentially his deathbed, didn't know how to contact him, but knew where the town that he lived in, and went to the local police department and got the police to take him. He essentially asked him, like, where is he? Yeah. And they took him to him, and they had their last, you know, kind of burying the hatchet, even now I'm getting like chills talking about it. So it was like to see that moment where, you know, Bill Murray kind of looks over and says, "I had a feeling you'd show up." Like I genuinely like I fully teared up. And I think it was worth it just from that aspect, and having the original guys, to the point that we've very much been alluding to this whole podcast, is that the fact that it's like, you can't replace those guys. You just can't. Yeah. And having them come back in instantly made me just go like, why didn't we just make another sequel with these guys? Because like, who cares that they're older? They're fucking brilliant. They're still brilliant. They still have it. Winston's like a multi-millionaire billionaire now, and he's supporting the whole crew. Like, I just thought there were so many. He looks great. He's jacked, by the way. I was checking IMDb before I came on here, and just to kind of get some names straight and what have you. And his profile picture on IMDb, like, I don't know how old he is, but he's like, I'm gonna figure out what his workout routine is and start doing that, because those Ghostbusters don't know what's gonna hit them if they do that sequel.
So here's how I felt with the treatment of the original cast. So I thought the CGI, you know, deep fake recreation of Harold Ramis looked spectacular. Yes. I think having him show up at the end, grab hold of the you know, the thing with his granddaughter, and then to also stand beside the four guys, beautifully done. I did feel after those two moments, it lingered on a little long, where I'm like a little uncomfortable, where I'm like, the dead guy's been here for a while. The fake dead guy has been here so that was the only thing. You know, that's a bit of a nitpick, but it did linger. It lingered. And I think the reason why it lingered was because the story that they told here put him in a position, like the character of Egon, where he had to settle so many dramas. Like he had to like reconcile with almost every character there, which I didn't love. I think there were other ways, because a movie's got a movie, right? So they did have to find a way, I get it, to like have the Ghostbusters have gone their separate ways in order for them to come back together and things like that. But I just, when she phones Ray from jail and he says, Egon Spangler can go to hell.
Yes.
That didn't sit right with me. That I didn't like that because the one thing, what's great about going back, like these classic movies, and why, there's a part of me, a probably bigger part than not that says to leave them alone, because you want to just live in the world where all of these people went off and had lived happily ever after.
Right.
And so the thought of having, because again, you talk about the real life implications of that scene, which are certainly, play into the emotion of it. But from the context of the movie, like Ray and Spangler were like the inseparable duo. Yes. So to have him kind of be like, we haven't spoken in decades, I just felt, oh, that's awful. Like, that's awful that this is like, that's how we're going to treat our Ghostbusters. Like, how dare you? And then even like,
I get it though. Yeah.
And then even like with his daughter, right? It's like, could we have not come up with a way that maybe, because we don't know who the mother is. So like maybe, him and the mother didn't work out and she went off to live with him. And like, and so the relationship was strained, but it wasn't that he was, because I just thought they really kind of did him dirty a little bit in that, he kind of pissed off. And I get that they're saying it's because he was in this town, but like, fine, move your family to the barn.
Yeah.
Like, Like it was like he was kind of an absentee dad. He was an absentee friend. He was an absentee grandfather. It felt a little like, I understand what they were trying to do, but to me, it was just like a bit too far where I was like, no, like,
right. Yeah.
Because I get it. You wanted to have that moment at the end where they're all like, oh my God, I can't believe he passed away. But like, couldn't he have just been gone for like a few years, not 15, and not abandoned them and taken all their tech and all? Like, it just felt
there is something to be said for the fact that it was like, I think without some sort of layered dramatic element to one of the characters, I don't know how you work them back in without it just being very much like this, the quote unquote sequel or soft remake they did with Melissa McCarthy and Kate McKinnon, et cetera, et cetera. And you know what? There was something I'll disagree only in the sense that like, it didn't bother me as much because they gave him his moment at the end of being like, well, he was doing this to protect you all. And it was more save the world. And it was more about the fact that it was like, oh, it was actually the other three that had actually almost done him dirty, because it sounded more like in hindsight, like near
they didn't believe him, and
they didn't believe him. He kept trying to tell them, and they said like, there had been, no ghost sightings in years, and he had this premonition or scientific belief that this was going to happen again in 2021, blah blah blah. And the fact that they were like, no, it's over, we're moving on, and nobody believed him, and he said it was out in the middle of Oklahoma and everything else, and they just kind of fopped him off. Whereas so because to be fair, like I said, I was doing that as well. I'm like, they're making him out to be a dick. But in reality, it was, what did you do to him? But in the end, I was very like, okay. And like, I kind of had obviously an idea that they were probably going to go that way. But that being said, like, I still didn't know. So in the end, I appreciated the fact that it was like, he was kind of the, quiet hero, and just like his granddaughter. And it kind of did this full like, and I appreciated it that it was there, and you had the quiet moments with, Bill Murray and like him talking to, or like you said, like Dan Aykroyd talking to podcast and just all those little kind of like side conversations. But, all that being said, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the overall like popcorn, flick of, what a Ghostbusters movie really is. And it's supposed to be like a fun time at the theater. I think it's us having those heartstrings pulled at with the originals and knowing how good those were, that nothing was ever going to really live up. but I felt like they did a fine job. I felt like they did a fine job.
Yeah, I would say this is a totally, this movie is by no means bad. It is a passable, enjoyable film. I think it is just like a case study in a movie trying to find its own voice while paying tribute to the original and sort of the problems that can ensue with that. Like, the last thing I'll say is, you get to the post-credit scenes that you spoke to. Like my favorite post-credit scene was Bill Murray and Sigourney Weaver just sitting there playing the game from the first. And the reason why I love that is because of what I said. It's like, that means that they lived happily ever after. That's means that after Vigo, Dana, Venkman, and Oscar went off together and were a cute little family, and they're still together till today.
Yeah.
So I think, like I love the moments that brought you back into it, but it's such a funny thing where it was also weighed down by it.
And so that's what I think. That's the element that we just and I think a lot of people are walking away feeling the same thing, where the nostalgia is there. We wanted more. We maybe wanted more of like those OG guys to be in it. I was actually surprised when they brought in Dan Aykroyd in like maybe like the third act, in the phone call situation, because I thought that they were fully just gonna wait till they just like sprung into action, which they did in the end, but it was like it wasn't just out of nowhere, which I appreciated. But like we said, that all that being said, I think it was a fine film. I think it also set itself up to maybe, like I said earlier, like they're clearly leaving the door open for some kind of sequel. I don't know what that's going to entail. It did feel like maybe they actually did close the book on what happened in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Meaning like, I don't know that they're going to maybe bring all those characters back.
Yeah,
they might bring back McKenna Grace. Just maybe because she was such a standout, but I don't think you need to bring back all of them. And maybe you bring back a Paul Rudd or something like that, but I would be very curious to see this as like more of a its own thing on its own. Maybe they're actually teamed up with Bill Murray and them this time, and it's like a real something else, like a whole other news story, not harkening back to the first one, not now that we're getting another sequel doing like a version of the second Ghostbusters movie, and like what I mean, like do something else. It would I think it would benefit the franchise, because I would love to see more, but I think it would benefit from just maybe going back to some of those traditional elements of just being like that kind of movie for this generation, and not necessarily be so weighed down by the originals.
Yeah, I mean, time will tell if they will be successful with it. So I think overall, we both think that this is worth going to the theater to check out.
Absolutely. I think we both check it out.
I think we both encourage everyone to go back and revisit the first two, maybe skip the 2016 one for all its good intentions.
Yeah, it had its moments, but it's just like,
I mean, we got busy schedules. Don't prioritize that one at the top.
No, it's not necessary.
And time will tell what a sequel looks like. So Brad, I don't know if you had any final thoughts, but I guess I have to do Rob's like little bit here. Oh my God.
Furnished. Okay. I'm over here just being a regular old Brad Miller. You got to do your thing.
All right. Talkin' Pop listeners, if you like what you see, hit that like button, subscribe, the algorithm, all that. You can also follow us on Instagram at Talkin' Pop. I think that's it. Did I do it?
Watch the episodes. Go
back, watch them all. Tell your friends.
We're gonna insert a picture here of Rob on vacation. I think we need to. We'll see how he's doing. We'll get a quick hello from Rob from the beach, so all the listeners aren't upset.
All right, folks. Thanks so much. We'll catch you next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.